It's great to be here. I'm Barbara Adams, faculty at Parsons School of Design.
And I'm John Bruce. I'm also faculty at Parsons School of Design, and I also serve as the director of the MFA Transdisciplinary Design program. Our talk today is titled Public Library Workers, Unconditional Hospitality and Shared Leadership. The people who work at the Bedford branch of the Brooklyn Public Library extend care to each other, fostering reciprocity and trust that in turn supports conditions for greater capacities to care for library patrons. The Bedford branch is one of 66 branches of the Brooklyn Public Library system and is located in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood of Brooklyn, a neighborhood that is also undergoing rapid gentrification, a neighborhood that is also disproportionately impacted by high incarceration rates and homelessness, among other forms of precariousness. Staff at this branch are adept in recognizing, respecting, and building on existing community and neighborhood relations, whether leading a story circle for children, building robots in the basement with teens, or assisting patrons in finding employment for other vital social services.
Public libraries are one of the few places in our society that offer opportunities to engage with people, share services, and exchange resources without structural partitions or economic demands. Our presentation, informed by video-based ethnographic research with the Brooklyn Public Library, explores the role of library workers as agents of radical hospitality. Hospitality extends protection, enables survival, fosters connectedness, and conveys respect. It converts strangers into familiars and repositions outsiders as insiders. As such, it's deeply entwined with modes of caring.
In the case of library workers, the capacity to extend care both informs practices of shared leadership and is a result of this cooperative model. As libraries develop services for immigrants, elders, the unhoused, and those transitioning out of correctional systems, they intervene where other services fail or are absent. In doing so, because the library is an institution without stigma, parameters of alliance are redrawn. Alliances between staff and patrons are convivial and respectful, something that is also true for the relationship between those working at the library.
Our research showed that library staff plays a central role in the library's ability to make critical connections. Their knowledge is situated and local, as well as institutional and based in expertise. Shadowing staff via participant observation revealed the varied and complex roles navigated by librarians. In addition to the traditional tasks demanded of library staff, we can add the role of community problem solver. We documented the myriad ways library staff address the needs of patrons in tactical, improvisational ways. This form of human capital functions beyond the boundaries of any job description. We witnessed ways of working that were adaptive and attuned, moving at the speed of trust. These practices are nimble and show familiarity with and knowledge of a broad range of spatial, economic, and residential positions. Moreover, these capacities are grounded in a commitment to transformative justice expressed through quotidian relations. Staff are radically open and exhibit the capacity to effectively engage an incredibly wide range of publics.
Branch staff include trained and credentialed librarians who work alongside other staff, all of whom serve as reference clerks, bespoke program facilitators, and support an array of other operational tasks. At the Bedford branch, certain staff become recognizable as associated with particular functions, such as library resources for children. Otherwise, the staff and supervisors are interchangeable in their availability to provide services to patrons. From the patron's perspective, the organizational structure of the library is flat, flexible, and easily accessible.
I think because
Right?
we like what we do,
Yeah,
though.
like what
we
do.
enjoy what
all,
we...
Yeah, we all genuinely, I would say, care about each other. I wouldn't want to have to call Christina all the way upstairs to do something that I know I could do myself. You know, things like that. It's like, all right, I know she's busy, so let me try to read a story to the kids, or, you know, it's like things like that go a long way. Just teamwork, I guess. You know, genuinely caring about each other and each other's well-being, things like that goes a long way.
I mean, you said it yourself. You started out as a part-timer.
Yes,
you moved through the ranks.
Right.
But here you are,
But
you know, in a leadership position, and you're not like, look, I paid my dues. I don't need to be bothered with that thing anymore. I'm above it.
No, I can't, because
But that's
to
how
me,
she gets respect, though. That's why we respect her so much. It's because she's willing to get her hands dirty and nothing is necessarily
Christina's
above
trying to
her.
make me cry. No, but I think that I like working with the public. Like, I really enjoy, like, if I see someone and they come in and they're like, oh, I need to print my resume. I have an interview in an hour. I feel like it's rewarding to me, because it's like I could be possibly the person that helps this person get a job and change their lives.
And you know what? A lot of the branch personality comes from its leader. You know, I've worked at branches that had a lot more stern leaders who were like, listen, the TRS does this, and this person does this and that, and the whole branch would take on that personality, you know? I've worked in atmospheres like that, but over here it's nothing like that, because our leader is like, yes, just having the freedom, like, you know, I'm a circulation supervisor, but she gives me the freedom to do tech programs and things like that. She gives me the freedom, if it'll bring people in the library, she usually gives me the freedom to do whatever I like, you know? And that's not something I can get everywhere in the library. You know, some managers will say, hey, you have this, and that to do, let the TRS do that, you know? But I think that's what works for us here, that we all could put on any hat that we want to.
And I think for me with staff members, I look at people's strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes you have to know who to call on for a particular task. And I like what I do. And I like to laugh and have a good time, and you know, like I said, I feel like we're here, we're like a family. Sometimes we're here with each other more than we're with our families, so you have to make it light and make people, you know that they're capable of doing their job. Sometimes, you know, you don't want your supervisor to always be like, oh, you have to,
Right.
you know. Well, I think I let everybody be themselves, and they don't feel like behind the, I always say behind the scenes, you can let loose.
The library staff recognize and celebrate each other as people, embracing the complex personhood of all members of the team. In this way, their knowledge, wisdom, and empathy is translated to acts of genuine care through library services.
One afternoon, during our fieldwork observations, a man collapsed near the entrance to the library. The reference desk staff reacted calmly and with smooth efficiency, without becoming hysterical or overly alarmed, in part because they knew this man and understood that he'd long been struggling with heroin addiction and was taking methadone. One librarian went outside and gave him a glass of water, crouched down and spoke with him gently. Another called an EMT service and met their vehicle outside and was able to debrief with them before they approached the man. In this way, the local knowledge and wisdom was in play. The man was treated with respect and care rather than rules or laws or judgment that might otherwise have been the case.
On another occasion, a new patron approached the desk to get a library card, and as the staff created his card and engaged him in friendly conversation, he revealed that he'd recently re-entered the community after being incarcerated and was seeking information on wrongful conviction. These exchanges reveal a choreography of care, a community of conscious concern, where people are welcomed without judgment.
Let me show it to you. Well, you see, you gotta be careful a lot of things. They could be collecting monies and donations and all.
He did like 17 years. I was telling my
That's
supervisor.
the cat that just came home off the body.
I don't know. Let me show you this one.
Because patrons are welcomed guests rather than consumers to be serviced, relations with patrons are more improvisational and intimate than the typical and transactional client relation.
I'm in tune with people. like I like helping people. So I can go the extra yard because I know if I walk someplace, I may not say what I really need help with, but it might be a whole list of things I need help with. So that's why I'm always trying to help people. Because I remember I was at the age teenager, you know, I dropped out of high school, and this lady I knew, she gave me information about GED program. Then somebody else gave me information about Job Corps. And somebody else gave me information about college. So to me, I think you should share information.
The shared leadership model of the Bedford branch at BPL operates with intentionality in terms of valuing the time and space required for developing reciprocal exchanges among staff and between staff and patrons. In this way, care in and through community service is granted acknowledgement, legitimacy, and purpose. The library as an institution, its workers, its services, and its role in the community provides more than those transactions officially understood under the rubric of the library's services, and is not limited to rigidly defined operations. Maria Puig de la Bellacasa writes that standing by the vital necessity of care means standing for sustainable and flourishing relations, not merely survivalist or instrumental ones. CARE at the Bedford Library is active in a number of ways that extend how we understand kinship and alliance. We recognize the local specificity of the branch we studied and how the library workers were particularly forthcoming in their manifestations of care. Other branches and other social institutions will certainly differ in this regard. Yet we see this diversity not as a limitation, but rather as a reminder that care is always situated and specific. Practices of care, as the workers at Bedford show, flourish when everyday conditions foster trust and are committed to equity.
When caregivers are supported, they have greater capacity to participate in integral and holistic ways, contributing to our collective liberation.
See you again, Paul.
In this paper, I'm exploring caring practices as strategies of resistance, rebuilding, and reorientation in activist spaces, using the example of student activists during the 2018 UCU strikes. In particular, I'm theorizing around the ways in which activists in my research understood care as an act of material survival of people in picket lines, as well as a particular strategy of refusing capitalism's effective directions and directives. This capacity within caring activism for redirection points to care as a generative practice of resistance, speaking to potentials for world building and increased capacities for radical imaginations. In 2018, University College Union members went on strike in over 60 universities in the UK. Students joined staff at the mass picket lines and protests and staged their own rallies and occupations, whilst also engaging in quieter, smaller strategies of organizing, what Heidi Mercer has called a quiet riot. At my university, students organized daily breakfast runs to the picket lines around the city, carrying hot water, coffee, tea, and biscuits to the staff on strike. It was in these breakfast runs and sort of quieter, more mundane strategies of organizing that I situated my research, conducting autoethnographic research methods alongside a small number of interviews with queer people, women, and people of color, who were instrumental in organizing student activist responses to the UCU 2018 strikes. Breakfast runs were suggested by one of my participants, Jude, during a student organizing meeting to strategize responses to the upcoming strikes. Jude was inspired by her own experience of helping stock the resource centers during the 2014 umbrella movement in Hong Kong, speaking to the legacies of care and reproductive activism occurring in the background spaces of protests and picket lines, sustaining social movements and helping those most vulnerable to state violence to survive. There is a wealth of examples of care as a politics of survival. On the picket lines, the work of women against pit closures not only involved public demonstrations and occupations, but soup kitchens and food parcels that meant striking miners were able to continue in their struggle. In a different context, as Nick Haynen documents, the Black Panther Party breakfast program fed thousands of children in order to ensure the survival of Black people and communities in the face of a capitalist, racist state hostile to their existence. Both Deborah Gold and Anne Svetkovich detail the caring efforts of LGBT people during the AIDS crisis in America. Communities and collectivities forming around healthcare and welfare needs that were not met by the state. It is oppressed people, people most likely to suffer under or be neglected by institutions and apparatuses of care who have continually illustrated the necessity of a politics of care in our social movements and revolutionary struggles. The UCU strikes, obviously a limited example of the urgent and necessary work of care to sustain the picket line, protest, or social movement. After all, lecturers weren't surviving on coffee and biscuits alone. However, my research participants understood the breakfast runs as an opportunity to display solidarity with striking workers and help create the conditions of possibility for the strike to survive. It is also significant the majority of people leading the breakfast runs were women, students of colour, and queer students, people most likely to have an understanding or experience of the necessities and transformative potentials of care. Bring food and hot drinks to the picket lines, especially during a march filled with snowstorms, was a practice of actual and symbolic maintenance of the strike and care work as a way to sustain the movement. This practice of supporting the picket line through care work played out in successes during the strike protest. These acts of care were ways in which hundreds of students were able to display solidarity with and support for their lecturers. And this support was one of the ways through which staff members were able to continue the fight on the picket lines. For instance, Zoe is discussing a case where our UCU branch voted against the deal offered to them, bolstered in part by the large-scale displays of student support on the picket lines. And Jude made connections between the routinized acts of everyday care and the political escalation that was possible during the strikes. The tangible links of support and solidarity between students and staff were building blocks to later actions, including student occupations of central university buildings. Already we're seeing these particular temporal characteristics of care. If care is to survive, caring activism is a futural practice. I'm sure we're all aware of the processes of marketization that have occurred in higher education institutions since the 1980s. Alongside high tuition fees and an increasingly casualized and precarious job market, the purpose of higher education has become the provision of marketable skills and research outputs. The UCU strikes were an opportunity to fight these aspects of the university, as students and staff all affected by the for-profit term in institutions for education. However, my research participants and other activists saw firsthand the effective conclusions of the marketization of education. Many other students saw it not as an emergent space of struggle, but the disruption of the provision of their service. Motions were brought to student councils and petitions were brought to universities, as you can see, calling for reimbursement of student loans due to the strike. False lines were drawn between the lecturers' wages and student loan payments. Was any argument of student loans in totality being unnecessary or ignored? Simultaneously, student activists, including all my participants, were told they were damaging students' welfare by asking them not to cross the picket line. Scab became a slur, and staff-student solidarities became literal acts of uncaring. So the effective orientations of marketization saw students inhabiting the space of the university as consumers, individualized and responsibilized subjects disrupted by the strikes, rather than mistreated or exploited by the institutions responsible. In the face of these orientations, my participants saw the breakfast runs as a mode of effective refusal. Care was a strategy of changing or reorienting the subjectification of the institution. Jude argued that this reorientation of both staff and students and the creation of new solidarities between them was particular to the practices of care that student activists were engaged in. Interacting with the staff on the picket lines every day opened up an emergent space before. She felt that these new relationships emerged through the sustained emotion that care makes possible. Liz speaks explicitly to what this relationship could be. Instead of viewing staff as service providers, it was on the picket lines and through acts of care that staff and students could encounter each other as human beings, all exploited in different ways through the university. Legacies of Black and queer feminism, Sarah Ahmed describes radical care as a practice of redirection. The strikes offered a way for students to turn in new directions and therefore create new possibilities of subjectivity. These micro-interactions and moments of recognition became a way of refusing to inhabit the university as directed, confronting the loss of connection and loss of solidarity that's permeated higher education. With this changing relationship on the picket lines came other examples of collective practice between staff and students. In particular, students began to creatively imagine new forms of academic practice and knowledge production that disrupted the style and relationship of the institution. Students approached staff to ask if they would hold teach-outs on particular topics. Staff approached students to work on teach-outs together. Groups formed across disciplines and outside the university itself. Hongri explicitly tied these emerging practices of knowledge production to politics and activism of care. As a politics of care allowed students and staff to re-encounter each other within the university, it also made a space for a mode of learning that enacted this care outside the space of the institution. The subjects of teach outs were wide. They included discussions with members of lesbians and gays support the minors, lectures on Kurdish feminist resistance, and created space where, as Hongri says, issues such as decolonization could be discussed within an institution usually hostile to these interventions. In their discussion of teach outs as a physical substantiation of care for one another, Hongri also related care to this idea of a positive vision. A caring politics was not only a reaction against the institution, but the opportunity to imagine how the university could be otherwise. In the case of the teach outs, this positive vision was an effort to create platforms of learning tied to the university as we dared to hope it could be. Everyday practices of care became ways to make space not only for new solidarities to form, but for collective visions and imaginations of a different university or no university to emerge. In many ways, a caring politics is a hopeful politics. By being both a practice of survival and reorientation, care opens up the future and allows us to hope for better. José Esteban Munoz draws on Ernst Bloch's concepts of concrete hope and utopia as the most useful understandings of hope for radical practice. Bloch understands concrete hope as a structure and mode of feeling with root and purpose in radical struggle. That is, our struggle makes hope possible, and hope simultaneously animates our struggle, giving us purpose to break out of the constraints of our present conditions. We might therefore understand care during the strikes as a practice of concrete hope, generating collective socialities, energies, and imaginative possibilities rooted in both what we do and what we can become, bringing in Munoz's queer horizons, for instance. Then temporal characteristics of a caring politics become manifold, building on legacies of care as a possibility of survival, focused on present conditions and the need to survive them, but oriented towards these queer horizons of caring possibilities. I situated my research in the breakfast runs due to my own orientations as a queer anti-capitalist organizer. I've used them as a site from which to theorize about care and the transformative potential of caring activism, but it's also important to recognize that they are a small example of the possibilities, strategies, and emergences of care in and out of activism. There were clear limitations to the transformative possibilities of these acts. They took place in an elite university, and crucially, they were mostly shouldered by already marginalized students. Any future of care that we build must be attuned to who cares and where we're able to care. Additionally, mobilization occurred only over a short period of time. Accordingly, the relationships formed on the picket lines or during teach outs were not sustainable. As the strikes ended, the university went back to normal. Anti-capitalist and abolitionist theorist has discussed the precarity of socialities formed in revolutionary moments such as Occupy. The fissure was not a place where we could live. We could not hold on to the new social forms we invented in the process of revolt. We failed to make the revolution our permanent home, but the spark is kept alive, underground, waiting for the right conditions. Although hope fueled by expansive and collective care might be powerful, breaking out of the present conditions requires risk, and taking this risk is difficult terrain, often not met with success. However, these everyday acts of care were, in these limited circumstances, a meaningful form of political education and transformation for activists at the time, the creation of a spark. I once again return to Bloch and his theory of the not yet, a quiet becoming of hopeful moments and turning points, underground and fragile, yet alive. Care might be understood as a revolutionary resource of the not yet, of the fissure, one that sustains and animates struggle, also provides a building block to new kinds of transformative feeling, possibilities, and knowledge productions. Thanks.